Hi, everybody. So great to see you today. Welcome to the UCFS Learning Series. I'm Leslie Burgess, and so we can get to our really exciting topic of safety with Tim Walsh. I'm going to start sharing my screen and give you a little bit of overview. For those of you who have joined us before, you have seen part of this presentation. I clicked the wrong button for 1 second. And I want to share a little bit more about our organization. So once again, thank you for being here. Leslie Burkis, Executive Director of the Urban Community Forestry Society, or UCFS. I'm going to start with an introduction, and then I'm going to kick it over to Tim Walsh, who we're so fortunate to have. Tim has a tremendous background in safety and really comes from the utility side, but as we'll hear from Dennis Fallon with the Utility Arborists Association, the utility forest is in the urban forest, and the urban forest is in the utility forest. So we really need to be thinking thoughtfully about how we make sure that our crews are safe within our urban forest. And we're going to come out a little bit differently for our urban forestry folks of how you can make sure your crews stay safe and the contractors you're working with. So if you haven't heard Safety 1 and Safety 2, I hadn't heard that before myself. Tim will explain the differences between the two. How we make sure that we get positive outcomes from our workers when they're out there doing the important tree work, and then just overall the pivotal role of maintaining safety within our workers and really having our workers make sure that they're helping us maintain safety guidelines. So I'll make sure Tim covers that here when we go through it. Really quickly want to thank our members and sponsors. If you are a member of the organization, thank you so much. You are who make these things happen. You who are help support all of us across the country and world. If you're not a member, really hope that you'll join us when the time is right. And we also thank our sponsors, Eocene and Planet Geo, for helping make these types of things possible. As we're getting started, would love for you to drop your name and where you're from in the chat. It's so fun to see everybody and see where people are from. So please let us know who's here. This webinar is being recorded and I will share it afterwards. This is approved for one ISA CEU. And at the end of the webinar, we will drop a form in the chat for you to be able to fill out your CEU information, and we will turn that in on your behalf. You are on mute, but if you have questions throughout, please put them in the chat. And at the end, I can bring you off mute too, so you can ask a question of Tim. So UCFS. We are here to build the confidence, competence, and camaraderie of all professionals who manage trees and forests to create and sustain more livable communities. Really, what that means is that we are the professional membership home for the people who make and support daily tree planting and care decisions. So if you were hired by your city to make a daily tree care decision, where, when, and how a tree is going to go in the ground, you should be a member of this association and society. If you support those people, either through being a state coordinator or providing grants, or you are in private business and you're helping provide products to those folks, you are supporting a daily tree care decision, and we really welcome you within the society so that you can feel more confident in the decisions you're making. We offer a variety of opportunities for members from our City Trees publication, which I really think is the premier publication on urban forestry, if I do say so myself. We have member-only opportunities like the Arborist Exchange and Mentorship Program. And we have opportunities like this that are open to all. And so you can get to know more about our society before hopefully you join. Coming up, some of the big highlights for us is our conference. Our conference will be coming up on November 18th and 19th in Chicago. Registration is opening next week on Tuesday, July 30th. So you'll be getting notice in your inbox, but hopefully you'll join us in Chicago where you can really deep dive into the information and learn more about how you do urban forestry in your neck of the woods. Also next week, we got a big week ahead of us. Municipal Forestry Institute is opening. So Municipal Forestry Institute, MFI, is how we train leaders to become the premier leaders of urban forestry. It is not arboriculture, it's not pest and disease. This is how you lead from your seat. Registration is opening on the 1st. We'll drop a link in the chat so you can be the first to be notified and fill out your interest. And you'll also get to find out where we're holding it. We're kind of keeping it under our hat. So next week, you get to find out the exciting location we'll be in. Next month, our next learning series on August 22nd is going to be all about urban wood reuse from the folks in Milwaukee who have really dialed in their urban reuse program. So tune in for that. We'll drop a chat or link in the chat so you can sign up for that as well. Finally, thank you again to our members. You are who make this possible. You are the network of people who are making those daily tree care decisions, and we want to support you. If you're not a member, you should really be with your tree people. So hope that you'll join us when the time is right. So I'm going to stop sharing. Just going to hit the wrong button. There we go. Tim, you ready to start sharing yours? Oh, sorry, I'm going to kick this over to Dennis, and Dennis is going to say a little bit about UAA and then introduce Tim.
Thank you, Leslie. It's a pleasure to be here today and pleasure to be in front of this entire group. And like Leslie mentioned, the UAA, the Utility Harvest Association, really should be working closely with the UCFS and all the other organizations out there. Energy and utilities underpin our economic development in our communities, as well as our public safety and public health, and are an integral part. There's a utility forest within every community forest canopy, and we really do need each other. And it was very nice of Leslie to bring the opportunity from the utility sector in to bring to the municipal sector as well, and the community sector. Safety is at the forefront of what we do every day. It's a high risk role. It's a high risk work that's out there. And with proper mitigation, we can make sure that our people go home well and go home safely. And we're very excited that we're on the forefront of a safety culture shift and a step change in the safety paradigm and how we look at safety. And Tim Walsh is the Vice President of Safety and Training for Townsend Tree. He's also the immediate past president of the Utility Harvest Association. And he's going to give us a presentation. So Tim, when you get your screen up there, I'll turn it over to you. And again, thanks to everybody for letting the UAA partner with you and share.
All right, thanks, Dennis. You seeing the single slide or the group of slides?
I see the group of slides on the left. I can see your slide counter.
Second here.
There it is.
There we go. Single slide?
Single slide.
Awesome. Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, Leslie. Thank you, UCFS and UAA, for this opportunity, and thank you, UCFS membership. So we're going to roll through some things. Some of you I know are aware of some of these concepts. Some may be new. And although the topic is implementing safety differently for city foresters, overseeing tree and vegetation management crews, the concepts come from human and organizational performance, which it's a secret. It's not just about safety. So if you can manage these principles and concepts, it'll improve everything from quality to efficiency. Obviously, I'm biased. Safety is what I do. So that's the angle we're going to take. So again, thanks for the opportunity. And as Leslie said, feel free to drop some questions in. At the end, I'll put a link for contact information for additional questions. So we'll roll right into it. So we're talking a little bit about the progression of safety practices. You'll hear safety 1 and safety 2. We'll touch on the difference and how they're not that different, and then get into the old view of incident prevention and how that doesn't really reduce SIFs, which are serious incidents and fatalities. Take us through human performance improvement into safety differently, and then end on learning teams or organizational learning along with some resources. And again, keep in mind that although these things are targeted kind of at safety, it's a little bit of everything. And as you go through, be thinking about how this can impact the crews that you oversee. And I'll try to drop some suggestions in along the way. So we'll get going. And this is kind of the overview of the safety journey so far. We really started based on compliance. OSHA was created in 1970. The ANSI standard was actually predates that, the origins of that started in 1968, but we really started on just compliance, focusing on rules, enforcement, behaviors. As we go through time, the number of incidents start decreasing because we're following rules and we're looking at behaviors. We started designing things differently, looking at human factors and process safety. And again, through time, incidents decreased, but then we still have fatalities and serious events. And what we're finding is they're not really like some of the other things. You think of a rolled ankle or a poison ivy, which could be an incident that gets you on the OSHA log. Those are not necessarily related to the same causes of fatalities. So we'll go through some of that, but these bad things that happen, actually the same things that cause the bad things cause good things. So it's going to be a little bit of a shift in mindset as we go through this. So the comparison with safety 1 and safety 2, and I caution this a little bit. I've actually changed this slide through the years. It's safety 1 and safety 2, and you'll see on some of the safety discussion forums like it's a battle between the two, and it really isn't. Safety 1 was kind of the origin and the history of safety, and it's still a component of Safety 2. We can't really get away from it, but I just wanted to be aware that some folks think that it's one or the other. But Safety 1 focuses on the bad things, the injuries, or maybe a near miss. A branch falls and doesn't hit me. We tend to focus, that's really what Safety 1 is about. Safety 2 is about everything. It's about all the other good stuff that's happening out there. And we need to understand the good as well as the bad. Another way, just kind of shifting this from a sort of math perspective, that Safety 1 is looking at accidents and disasters, and it's really one of the tails. Like it's an outlier. It's a very small piece of all the things that happen every day in the workplace. So there's opportunities and different outcomes that are out there that we're missing if we're focusing solely on the bad things. So a better way to look at it is from Eric Hallnagel's work. He's one of the quintessential researchers in this relationship between Safety 1 and Safety 2. It's kind of a Venn diagram. Safety 1 is part of Safety 2. So we're always going to be looking at incidents, accidents, however you term it. We're never going to get away from that, but the Safety 2 focuses really on all the other stuff. It's on resilience, it's on capacity, it's building the ability to fail safely. So just wanted to touch a little bit on that. A problem with the old view, and especially in the utility sector that I've lived a lot of my life, just Safety 1, we become literal and figurative smoke jumpers. A lot of my career has been spent getting a phone call. Some terrible thing happened in another part of the world. I jump on a plane, I go in, I deal with the event, deal with the client, deal with OSHA, deal with lawyers, and then I get another phone call and I jump, go to the other part of the country. Although there's always going to be that need to react to events, it doesn't really move us forward. So we need to do things a little bit differently. A lot of the safety that we do now comes from work in the 30s. Many of you have probably seen a triangle like this, or similar versions of this, but Heinrich looked at 12,000 injuries. They worked for an insurance company, and he found that there was a connection in terms of, for every serious incident, there were 30 minor incidents and 30 near misses. That's just what he found. And if you read his work, he never drew a triangle. We have taken this into this pyramid or triangle to make it visual and easier to understand and remember. But he never actually really looked at that as the triangle. So we'll come back to this in a little bit, but these concepts led us down some paths that weren't actually beneficial to us. So if you look through time, and this is some data, and you could probably grab data from anyone. This happens to be injury and illness rates from North Carolina private sector from 2004 to 22. And you see the injury rates are declining through the years. And however you map this out, it would probably look very similar. The problem is, if you look at this bottom bar, that's the preventable death rate in the US from 1992 to 2022. So if you look from about 2009, it's almost flat. So while we might be reducing poison ivies and sprained ankles in stitches, serious incident fatalities are not decreasing. And to some extent, they may be increasing. So we'll come back to Heinrich. So this pyramid concept made us think that if we reduced the near misses and reduced the minors, we would have fewer serious. So this is where the frequency breeds severity came from, and we found out that that is not true. And actually, it puts us in a different mindset and sends us in a different direction than we need to be. So it wasn't bad work. All Heinrich did is make this connection of, based on the data that he looked at, he saw this relationship. So others started looking at that to see, is this predictive? And in 2007, Tom Krause and behavioral safety training, looked at this, and they found that the behaviors that cause SIFs, or serious incidents of fatalities, was only about 21% of all of the behaviors. So there really isn't a connection between the behaviors and the fatalities or serious incidents. So part of this, especially when you live in the utility space, TRIR, which is the total recordable injury rate. Some people call it TCIR, total case injury rate. This is a rate uses looking at number of injuries reported that meet the threshold of what they consider serious enough, which is beyond first aid, that go into this calculation. It's based on 100 workers that do 2,000 hours a year. So it's a number that's held up as having value, meaning the lower your TRIR is, the safer you are. However, although that is a metric of injuries that meet that criterion, there's science that proves that that's not true. So Matt Hallowell and Construction Safety Research Alliance did some math on this, and that's right there. It's trillion with a T. They looked at 3.2 trillion full-time equivalent hours to see, is there any validity to this number? Does it mean you're safe or not? And what they found is that there is no discernible association between TRIR and fatalities. And the occurrence of recordable injuries is almost entirely random. And at one point, they said that the only thing more random than random is TRIR. It's definitely not a precise number and shouldn't be used out to a couple decimal points. And it's nearly impractical, improbable, or not useful to use TRIR to compare companies, business units, projects, or teams. But for those of us in the utility space, that's exactly what happens. If your TRIR does not meet what the utility client is asking for, you're removed from the property and somebody else comes in. So now we're starting to take a look at what we thought was true, maybe not be so true. And now we see that this number, although it is a metric of injuries, it really is not, does not show much value. So a few organizations are working with OSHA, the ULCSP, which is the Utility Line Clearance Safety Partnership, the biggest 14 line clearance contractors in the U.S., along with the Edison Electric Institute and others, are asking OSHA to come out and say affirmatively that TRIR is not indicative of safety performance. We had a meeting with them last week. We're looking at really trying to move into leading indicators. And this is a post on LinkedIn that got about 50,000 impressions and 60 reposts. So other industries are looking at this as well. Oops, sorry, double click there. So how do we move past this? So back in the early 2000s, Department of Energy did the sort of seminal work on human performance. It's a lot of great information. And by a lot, I mean a lot. It's a couple thousand pages, but great information. It's out there. It's free because you paid for it with your taxes already. So we started looking at post 3 Mile Island and other nuclear events. They looked at human performance. So we're shifting how we view things and trying to really get a better understanding of why events happen. So there's the 5 key principles of human performance. People are fallible. Everyone makes mistakes. We know it. Error likely situations are predictable, manageable, and preventable. Behavior is influenced by organizational processes and values. High performance comes from encouragement. It's not just your superiors, but it's coworkers and the folks that report up to you. And in the concept was that we can avoid events if we understand why these mistakes occur and apply lessons learned from the past. So you can take the couple thousand pages of the HPI stuff from the Department of Energy, and these are the 5 principles. So you'll see a lot of references to Todd Conklin throughout this presentation. Some of you are aware of him. He's got a podcast, Pre-Accident Investigation, done a bunch of good work. And Todd is known for taking very complex concepts and boiling down into something simple. So Todd's view of safety differently, or the human organizational performance, or HPI, human error is normal, and Todd says it's boring. I mean, there really is nothing interesting about it. I made a bunch of mistakes today, and about 15 already during this presentation. So it's normal, not even interesting. And blame fixes nothing. And we'll touch more on that because that really drives some of this. Learning is vital. If we don't learn individually and organizationally, we definitely can't improve. And context drives behavior. And this is one that we really need to dive into. And the last, and as leaders, we really need to take a look at this. How we respond to failure matters. And if you're overseeing tree crews, I really want you to focus on this one, because if the crew brings you what you view as a problem, and every time your reaction is anger, they're going to stop bringing you not only problems, but suggestions for improvement. So we really need to be cautious with how we respond to failure. So we touched on a couple of things, what we do, and Dennis led with this. The work we do is risky. There's hazards there. There's risk associated with it. And although we talk about risk reduction, we don't really reduce risk. What we're trying to do is make our systems more resilient, and we're trying to build competency and capacity into our systems, because we know people are going to fail, systems are going to fail, things are going to break. And when that happens, we want to be able to fail safely. And this is a little shift in mindset. Safety is not the absence of accidents or injuries. And back to TRIR, that's how it was viewed. If you had a 0 TRIR, that meant you were safe. But really all that 0 meant is you didn't report any injuries. So it's about the presence of capacity or controls. We really want to start looking at finding the risk and finding out if we have controls in place. And part of this you all can do as you're overseeing the work of crews. So it's, again, this is a little just shift in mindset. We used to just assume that if the crews came in and there was no complaints, they didn't break anything, nobody was hurt, that everything went right and we were safe. And so just the absence of bad information doesn't mean that things went well. So if nothing happens, we assume that nothing is wrong. But we really need to know what's going on out there. So you'll often hear the difference between the black line and the blue line. This comes from Todd Conklin and Bob Edwards. The black line is work as planned, and that could be OSHA regulations, ANSI Z133, policies and procedures, standard, best practices, whatever. So that's what we assume. So we send crews out and we assume that they're going to follow the black line. The reality is they don't. Sometimes they exceed what the black line is or what the recommendations are. Sometimes they dip below it. And part of this is we sit in our offices and we write regulations and we assume that we know how work is being performed. And the reality is we sometimes don't. And if we don't get out there, we're not going to know. And this is part of the psychological safety piece. If I'm not comfortable bringing something to my supervisor not going to learn that maybe we don't have the right equipment, or we don't have the right people, or we don't have the time. And so, through time, you see that blue line kind of wavers, and somewhere below there are the risks, are the hazards. And most often work is successful. But it can happen that if we dip below the recommendation or something happens that we didn't expect, we can have an incident, which is a little yellow star there. And workers are the master of the blue line, as Todd and Bob say. We give people the rules, we give them a job to do, and they go do it. And they don't follow the black line. Hate to break it to you if you weren't aware of that, but they figure things out. And most often they're successful when they do it. Sometimes they're not. So back to what's happening when nothing is happening. So if we have, 10,000 events, or maybe this is 10,000 employees or 10,000 days, however you want to view it, and we have one negative event, the worst is obviously a fatality or life-altering event or whatever it is. So we have this one bad event, while we had 9,999 non-failure events. So what do? We devote all of our resources to that one failure. I'm not saying we shouldn't look at incidents, but that same time frame, that same day, we had 9,999 employees doing the same job that were successful. And I can guarantee they were doing it almost the same way as the one that the bad thing happened to. Failure and success are pretty closely linked. So be aware that when we're focusing on the one bad thing, we're missing opportunities to learn from all of the good. And if we're not learning, we can't get any better. We really want to focus on being a learning organization. So a good example, I know some of you have seen me talk about this, others are aware of this, but a good kind of analogy to think about. Abraham Wald was a statistician during World War II. They started looking at planes that came back from bombing runs, and they mapped out the bullet holes. So you see the red dots, that's where the bullet holes were in the planes that came back from bombing runs. So they wanted to figure out how do they have more planes be more successful, carry more bombs, and return home. So the old view of safety is we attack the weakness. Back to the slide before, we go for the weakness, the one event. In this instance, it's the red dot where the bullet hit. So what we would normally do is we would attack the weakness and reinforce the weakness. But Abraham looked at it very differently when they were asking him where to put the armor. He said, don't put the armor where the bullet holes are. And they were confused by that. He said, because these are the planes that come back, and this is the survivorship bias. So what we don't know is about the planes that didn't survive the bombing runs. So he said, put the armor where the bullet holes aren't, and that's the cockpit and the engines primarily. It's a different way of looking at things. And when Todd Conklin talks about this, he talks about he was hired to do an analysis of a series of incidents for a company that puts solar panels on rooftops. And the bulk of their incidents weren't falling off the roof, it's falling through the ceiling. They have to climb up into the ceiling to check the rafters to make sure they're strong enough to support the weight, and they were falling through the ceilings. So they gave Todd a big stack of their incident investigation reports, and Todd just kind of threw them to the side. He said, I don't care about that. He said, I want to talk to the crews that don't fall through. And again, they're doing very similar things, but if we're focusing on the injury, if we're focusing on the bullet hole in the wing, we're missing a lot of information and the chance to really learn and grow as an organization. So Todd diagrams out the 3 parts of every failure. And we'll go in this a little bit more detail. We have the context, which is often very confusing. We have the consequence, and then we have retrospective understanding. And you'll hear people say that every accident is preventable. That's because we know the outcome. After the fact, every accident is preventable. But in the moment, as you're doing the job, there's all of these contextual components that we'll touch on in a little bit. So you don't know the outcome. But looking back, it's easy to say that, well, the person did A, which led to B to C to D, caused the event. So that's the retrospective understanding. We need to be thinking about the context to really understand how things are happening. And this gets us into the investigation. And I'm assuming you all are involved in some extent to investigations of events that occur in your municipalities. And so this is a challenge to all of us to do things differently. We need to stop seeing workers as the problem to be fixed. They are solutions to be harnessed. And this is some of the transition as we went from compliance-based to behavior-based, which is better than compliance-based, now into HOP or safety 2. Behavior-based safety still blames the worker. We're always trying to find what the worker did wrong, who caused this incident. And really, workers don't cause failures. They trigger latent conditions that lie dormant in organizations, waiting for that specific moment in time. It could be something as simple as the wrong piece of equipment. Workers, connected 2 things that weren't supposed to be connected, and it worked for the longest time. But at one point, there's going to be an event that it doesn't work anymore. So we need to back off of blaming the worker. Now, it's different if it's malicious and intentional and illegal, but if it's a human error, which is just something we didn't intend to do, if we are blaming the worker, that doesn't fix the problem. Because if I didn't mean to do that, you punishing me isn't going to make me not do the thing I didn't mean to do before again. So we need to change how we think. And this is one that's a bit challenging. And at an event a few months ago, I got a finger in the chest after my talk. The person didn't agree with me on this. But if your incident investigation ends with human error, lack of situational awareness, worker violated rule, your investigation hasn't truly ended. That can't be the end of the understanding of the event. Again, human error, it's common, it's normal, it's not even interesting, it's not something we meant to do. But if we have systems that have capacity, if or when, not if, but when I make that error, there's going to be something in place, there's going to be a control in place that'll keep that from being a fatality or serious life-altering event. So a different view of the kind of hindsight bias and the context. So this comes from Richard Cook, who's a doctor. A lot of medical professionals, aeronautics are big into HOP. But if you go backwards, so start with the person looking at the event after the accident, looking back, it's clear in their mind what caused the accident. So they know the outcome and they know the things that likely connected or lined up for that event to happen. But in the moment, you look at all that's going through that doctor's brain in this diagram, or the municipal arborist aloft who's got health issues, family, financial concerns, there's weather, there's homeowners yelling at them, there's a rabbit squirrel in the tree, there's all these things that affect how they do their job. And nobody comes to work to get hurt. Nobody comes to work to cause an outage or break a mailbox or damage a car. So we really need to understand the context. But if we do things the way we've done in the past, we're never going to get to understand that context. Part of this is reframing how we communicate. Sometimes an event happens and the first thing, your reaction as a leader is, what were you thinking? Now, it's easy to do that. I've done it myself. We've all done it. But if you step back and think about the context, the question is the same. How you phrase it might be different, and how you intone it might be different. It could be, what were you thinking? It made sense to you at the time to do whatever those series of events were. Why did it make sense to you at the time? Because I can guarantee that that same day, other people were in that same situation, probably making the same decision, but because of other factors, your event led to an injury, an illness, or property damage, whatever. So as leaders, it's really important that we understand the context and we're able to check our emotions to help understand how these events happen. So it's a shift of thinking from who failed to what failed. And it's easy. And again, in the utility space, it's really easy to look at who failed, in part because sometimes clients will say, I'll pick on Dennis Fallon, he's a friend. Tim, if you don't kick Dennis Fallon off the property because he broke the thing, we're going to kick your entire company off the contract. So what do? I move Dennis off of that contract to another one. So it's easy to focus on who. Additionally, the way OSHA views incidents when they come in to investigate, they're often looking for who failed as well. I've had cases where they said they would tear up a citation if we wrote up the person that caused the event. So there's pressure from the regulator, there's pressure from the client, and it's easy to blame people, as opposed to thinking, and even back to Heinrich's work, the 12,000 accident reports he looked at were all written by supervisors. So who do you think the supervisors blamed? It was always the employee. The supervisor wasn't going to blame themselves. And that's where that you start seeing that 80% of all incidents are caused by human error or behavior. That's where that some of that comes from. It's hard as a leader to look in the mirror and say, well, maybe I pushed Dennis too hard, or maybe like a lot of us just work hurricane recovery the last few weeks, working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, away from home in hot conditions. Maybe Dennis was tired. Maybe he missed his family. Maybe there's all these things. So we need to step back as a leader and get rid of the who failed and start looking at what failed. Another Conklin quote, this is a real simple one for simple concept, but it's hard to actually do. You have a choice. You can blame and punish, or you can learn and improve. You can't do both. I'll keep picking on Dennis. So Dennis has 40 years of experience in the profession. He breaks the thing, the client presses us. I have to fire Dennis because I don't want to lose a multi-million-dollar contract. I fire Dennis, 40 years of his experience goes out the door. And including the specific event, there's probably things that Dennis saw or felt or heard or smelt that if we could talk to him and understand it, we could probably prevent that thing from happening. So think about this. You can blame and punish or learn and improve. And I know the pressure's there. Homeowners screaming because you pull their power down when they were going to watch, the Super Bowl, or you ruin their Mercedes, or whatever the homeowner's angry about. There's probably pressure to focus on the who, but think about this. You can't blame and punish, but you can't do both. You have to do one or the other. I suggest that we learn and improve. So part of this process is in getting away from incident investigations we'll always analyze events, but we need to get away from this sort of true incident investigation. We've talked in the past about root cause analysis. Everyone likes the concept of root cause because it's clean, it's simple, has a nice little handle on it. I can hold it up to the client and say, here's the root cause. We're going to remove that, and this will never happen again. Root cause isn't a thing. We like it. We would like it to be, but it's not a real thing. So we need to do things differently. And the best way to do that is through learning teams. And this is one of Department of Energy's concepts, and Todd Conklin's and others, Andy Baker, Bob Edwards, a bunch of folks. But it's really about organizational learning. Normally, when we have an event, we, blame the person, we write the report, we find the root cause, and we get back to work. But we don't really change anything. And a good analogy here, and those of you who know the story, I'm going to probably get the numbers wrong again, but Ford Motor Company had a series of finger amputations, about 150 a year. So they did what a lot of organizations do when they have, some trending events. They had a hand safety campaign, they had hand safety posters, they had safety meetings, and then they went to 200 finger amputations a year. So they started talking to the employees that were actually doing the work. So they're getting into the field, they're seeing what that blue line truly looks like, and asking them, okay, can you explain how your work goes, and why do you think these finger amputations are happening? And very quickly, the employees said, well, the gloves we wear catch on some of the, and I'm very mechanically inclined, the spinny parts, and that's how our fingers get cut off. So if you maybe got us some gloves that had breakaway fingers, we could reduce the amputation. So they tried that, and they did what's called we call it a micro experiment. So somebody sort of hand sewed some gloves together, and the employees started working with them, and it started to work. So we call it a micro experiment because if you don't know it's going to work, you don't want to do that to your entire organization. It's okay to try it in one area to see if it works, and if it does, then you move it on. So then they kept asking more and more questions, and they found that spinny bit, spins 20, 30,000 times a day, and the metal was wearing and creating burrs. The burr was catching the glove and pulling the fingers in. So they reconfigured, they re-engineered the process and the metal around the spinny bit, and their finger amputations went to almost zero. And this is very different from the thing of Dennis stuck his finger into the machine and lost his finger. We need to involve those folks that are affected. We need to go in seeking to understand, not to blame. And there's a concept here of soak time. And usually these learning teams are done over a couple of days. We'll bring folks in, smallest group, 5 to 7, plus or minus, some safety, some operations, definitely the folks involved in the event. We talk about it, and then we soak for a day or two, and then we come back with some ideas, and then we use those to kind of flow into the micro experiments. So it's a different process, and I know I keep using the utility world experience, but often we need to have our complete investigation done in 24 hours. That you can't do a good job with that. So we need to be able to slow down and look at this from a very different perspective. So learning teams allows us to learn as an organization using the affected workers and using micro experiments to try different things out. Todd says the best safety is freedom from unacceptable risk. I actually just saw a paper recently that someone's trying to define safety, and there's tens of thousands of definitions of safety. I think this one's pretty decent. So I'll pause for questions because I can't see the chat. And Leslie or Dennis, feel free to jump in, and I can stop sharing if that's easier. The last slide I'll end on. Just if you have more questions and you're not comfortable asking here, well, two more slides. Sorry, Dennis. Couple of good resources, a lot of good books. Human and Organizational Potential, Ivan Popolitti and Krista Bessel. Ivan was a pilot for National Park Service. Couple of Todd's books, Workplace Fatalities, Failure to Predict, was really an inflection point for me. It changed how I viewed serious events. Sidney Decker's Understanding of Human Error. There's the papers by CSRA. Todd and Sidney's Do Safety Differently. And the last book just came out recently. Sidney Decker and Georgina Poole, Random Noise. And really, it's kind of looking, I'm oversimplifying, sorry, Sidney and Georgina, but really talking about kind of like the TRI, or if we're focusing on something that doesn't really matter, that's noise. And we're missing the signal, the things that are really going to keep our employees healthy and safe. So I'll pause here. The top QR gets you to my LinkedIn. I post a bunch of information there. The bottom is my contact information at Townsend. I'll stop sharing and we can go to questions if that's okay for everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. Wow. First, we will be dropping the ISACU form in the chat at the end of this, so hang around for that. And if you have a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat or raise your hand and we'll bring you off mute. That is so interesting, Tim, and like you, I'm just my mind's spinning to how those principles, just like you said at the top, really apply to like life and work in general. And you've put them towards safety specifically, but so many of those things are just how to make a good functioning team on the whole. Dennis, is there anything that you come from? You were working in city utility forestry before, and you work so closely with the municipalities. Anything you would share as we go into question time? How you saw this happening, or how you might see a city forester implementing these practices?
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. My background, I'm formally trained as a municipal urban and community forestry. My bachelor's in urban and community forestry, and as I envisioned that I would be a city forester someday. I see Hannibal Hayes. I actually interviewed for his job back in the day when Mark was over there. Well, it's a long time ago, maybe when trees were getting invented. The thing that I would say from a municipal perspective is it's the mindset, and Tim talks about it, the approach to the people and how we deal with our people. And thinking about labor and labor retention rates now, this is a very important piece. If our people are happy, our people want to stay around. They're also very well versed in what they do and how they do it. So that black line, blue line concept is one to really, and and maybe Tim, maybe you could speak to this a little bit on what you see from an employee retention perspective with the changing in the mindset. And then how long does it take for crews and frontline workers, the folks that are out there on the blue line, to begin to come forward and adopt this principle? How much skepticism is baked into a transition when we start to integrate safety 2 into our safety 1 and look into the capacity perspective?
Great question. I'm going to grab another book that I just picked up, haven't read yet, by Martha Costa, Safety Capacity Leadership Practices for Failing Safely. So it's just what you're talking about, but it's a couple of things that how many of us that have employees have too many employees? You're turning people away. You can't take qualified people anymore. That's not a thing. We can't get enough people. We're under 20%. We could hire 500 people tomorrow. So if we're firing people for making having errors or mistakes, we're chasing people out of the industry. And often what happens is if Townsend fires somebody for something, they're going to go to another vendor. But after being fired a couple of times, people leave the industry. This isn't easy work. And we're going to, work ourselves out of a job if we don't have any employees. So I think that's one thing. That was one of the things we did discuss with OSHA, that we all struggle finding and retaining people. So if that leads into your next part is, if I know I'm going to get fired if I tell Leslie I broke the thing, I'm probably not going to tell her. But if Leslie's built up that culture of psychological safety and I come in and I say, Leslie, I broke the thing, and she doesn't scream at me and she says, well, what were you thinking? We can figure out, maybe it was an equipment thing, maybe it's a mindset thing, maybe I just got off of 4 weeks of 16 hours a day storm duty and I'm too fatigued. I probably shouldn't have been out there. But specifically to your point, Dennis, the crews get it. They absolutely get it. So I've one of the things we didn't really touch on is the zero concept. A lot of organizations have zero as a target. All accidents are preventable. So no accidents are acceptable. What we're telling people is, don't tell me about the accident. So if the three of us, Leslie and Dennis and I, or Leslie and Dennis are on a crew, they've been working together, for X number of days, 10,000 work days without an event. I start, and by the way, 10,000 work days is about 38 years. If I start today and I get a cut that's going to require a stitch, guess what? That 38-year record is blown out of the water. Do you think there's going to be pressure from Leslie and Dennis to make sure I just duct tape that up and go back to work? Because they're probably going to lose their bonus. And there's internal pressure. I don't want to be the person that blows a 38-year record. So the employees understand that telling them that no accident, no accidents is the goal, they know it's foolish. And if they think we're foolish on that front, they think the rest is garbage. They know how to get the work done. That blue line varies. We need to do a better job with the black line. But if we're not out there in the field watching the crews work, and I don't mean, the old day of the supervisor drives by, cracks the window, throws some, job orders out the window and drives away. That's not what I mean. It's spending a couple hours a day with the crew until they get comfortable and they're working normally. They're, as soon as you come out, they're going to freeze. And after a while, when you don't fire them or yell at them, they'll start to get back to work, and eventually they'll get back to that blue line. So we really need to understand what's happening. I'm seeing some questions pop in.
Yeah, I was putting some questions in here, Tim, as well. And one, I was just curious if our city foresters knew Safety 1 and Safety 2, and I'd been kind of doing some informal polling before this, and a lot of people hadn't heard that term. So I think it's really great to be sharing the utility side or the safety side, OSHA side, with the city foresters as well. And then we had a question, are these concepts being taught in training certifications such as CTSP, Certified Tree Care Safety Professional through TCIA?
The short answer is they will be. Peter Gerstenberger sat through this talk at an event last fall, and he came out, he's kind of scratching his head, and he said, we need to redo the CTSP because some of the concepts there were based on behavior-based safety. In fact, they had the pyramid in there that just sort of, prolongs this view of all accidents are preventable and frequency breeds severity. So we're going to be working on that front to incorporate that into CTSP. We're working with OSHA to get them to understand, getting away from the lagging indicators into the leading indicators. So I think you're going to see it pop up more and more. And although, TCI Tree Care Industry Association has CTSP, the references that I have, these are, a lot of these folks came from Department of Energy, and a lot of them are in academia. Eric Holnagel, David Woods, Sidney Decker, they're all professors doing safety research, as well as other industries. So our industry is really kind of new to this, and I mean tree care in general, not just utility or municipal. We're just kind of getting into this. So there's a large body of work out there. So we're kind of playing catch up a little bit. But on a good note from the utility space, which influences a lot of what we do, a lot of the big investor-owned utilities are involved as well through the Edison Electric Institute, CSRA. So we're definitely moving in the right direction.
Well, Tim, as you've been talking here, and I'm kind of seeing some of the people in the chat that I recognize, couple things. One, I think is really good for a city forester to know what utility folks are working through and how they're working to keep their crews safe because they're within the utility forest or urban forest, just like Dennis said. So they're working in the forest that our folks are managing. But then you've also mentioned like getting fired or things like that, which probably wouldn't happen that quickly at a city level because either you work for a union or it's just not happening as quickly as it might happen in private industry. And one more thing, then I do have a question. So then a lot of our city foresters here may supervise a crew, or they may, like in Des Moines, they supervise a crew lead. So they're not the direct ones telling the crew what to do. The crew lead is doing that. Or I saw Kyle Urita on this call. He's a Department of One, but he relies on his park management staff, park crew that are not underneath him. They're overall managed by someone else, but they help him out do tree work. So if it's not too hard, I'm just kind of curious, how might those folks that don't have direct line access to crews, how might they take these safety principles and start to implement them and get better outcomes for their utility force and safer outcomes?
Sure, and I just a little bit tongue in cheek, but on the firing part, drop a tree on the mayor's car and see how quickly they get fired. So like tried to lead with, and I realized I didn't do as good a job of that, is that, if you understand some of these concepts, even if you're not doing the work, even if you're not overseeing the work, you're overseeing some that it's, getting those kind of 5 main concepts around and really kind of working backwards. It's the response that matters, so if by the time something bubbles up to, whatever, level you're at, if the response is anger, that's going to just crush any new information. But it's understanding, even from a training perspective, that we train to this, whatever the municipality standards are, the company or ANSI standards, all of that. but those aren't, they're not perfect. I mean, we just redid the Z133 and hopefully it'll be out in October. And I'll ask a loaded question to the group. How many of you are aware of how the standard has changed around electrical hazards, and could speak intelligently to it? So drop your answer in the chat. That sounds like I think we could do another couple of webinars on that alone. But really, you know, from that training perspective, if you understand what the work is, if you really see what that blue line is, you can tailor the training to that. It's easy to say, well, OSHA regulations say this, the ANSI says that, but if it doesn't really apply to the crews in the field, then the training's kind of wasted. But probably the single best thing that anyone can do, and this is whether it's safety, efficiency, productivity, you know, client interactions, whatever, it's creating a culture of psychological safety. If I'm comfortable challenging Dennis or bringing something uncomfortable to Leslie, then we all can grow from that. We can, you know, we'll learn, you know, maybe we gave people the wrong piece of equipment. Maybe the trees are 9 feet in diameter and the lanyard's 3 feet long. Maybe that's why the person fell, because it didn't work. Or maybe that's why they linked 2 lanyards together. But if we don't have a comfort level, we're never going to understand. And without that understanding, we really can't learn and grow. And really, it's just, you know, like I said, kind of filtering those concepts through everything you do. And it's not just safety based. And although selfishly, we sort of started on the safety journey with this, but really it affects everything we do.
Thanks, Tim. Well, as we're approaching the top of the hour, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat. Carla, I know Carla's on the line. Could you drop the ISA CEU form in the chat as well so people can start filling that out? And again, we'll submit that on your behalf. Dennis, anything final that you'd like to add from your perspective?
Tim mentioned a little bit talking about this is new in the utility space and with their utility tree crews, and it's an area that I think is going to benefit all of arboriculture. And actually, like Tim said, it's a management philosophy as much as it is a safety philosophy, and the way we approach these things. Every one of your municipalities or communities that you're working in has a utility arborist out there working in them. If you don't know those folks, get to know those folks. They're a resource for you. They can help you with this. One of the questions came about where is this being trained, and that they may be able to invite you into some of the trainings that they're doing and be more than happy to have you in with what they're doing in their areas. I don't want to commit anyone, obviously, but if you don't know, you can't ask. So get out there and get to know your utility arborist, find out what they're doing, where they can go. Like Tim said, there's a tremendous amount of change coming in the Z133 standard in the next revision, next edition. And that's going to have an impact on folks that have streetlight wires in our community, folks that run their own municipal lighting systems that have to work around those conductors. It changes the paradigm there a little bit. Folks that are municipal electric, if they have their own power in their communities, it's going to change that up. There's a new set of understanding. I think it makes it cleaner in the long run. However, it is a change that folks will have to understand, and there's a lot to be unpacked with the way that went together. So I really appreciate the Urban Community Forestry Society inviting us in here today and having this opportunity to chat and open this up. I am a firm believer in building bridges and shaking hands, and we for a lot of years have pointed fingers at each other in the industry and in the space. And we've come to a maturation point now. I think that people are recognizing that we need trees. People need trees, and we need trees around us. So the more of us that are working to that common outcome, the better off we are. And folks are open to listening and engaging now and can have those conversations. And we're getting more and more access to professional information and professional services. So utilize that and go out and make a new friend or two.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. I used to teach a volunteer tree training course here in the city of Des Moines, and we'd always invite our utility forester from Mid-American Energy in to speak for half an hour and talk about some of the OSHA requirements. And now they'd cleared lines for trees. And it was just a hit for people because, you know, a lot of people have some set ideas about how utilities are being, or trees are being cleared for utilities, and often they're not very positive. We know that it needs to be done, and we're all doing better for right tree, right place. But it was so eye-opening for our citizens to hear from the utility forester directly and understand a little bit more where they're coming from.
And two quick questions I can answer.
Yeah.
Someone asked, when will the Z133 revision be published? The goal, fingers crossed, is in October, and fingers are crossed, even though it's been approved, There's been a legal challenge hurled at it that the ISA has to get through. We're still hopeful that it'll come out in October. So keep your ears peeled for that. The other, somebody asked a question about where can I learn more about incident investigations, not the traditional. A good resource, I mentioned the names. There's Bob's Operational Guide, or Bob's Guide to Operational Learning, Bob Edwards and Andrea Baker. There's a ton of good stuff. Just search HOP learning teams. There's more information out there than you could read. I'm traveling with 4 new books this week.
Thanks, Tim. Well, appreciate it so much, Tim. Thank you so much for that. It's been super interesting. And like I said, there's so many ways that what you talked about, psychological safety, goes beyond just safety or in that traditional sense, but it goes into all of the work we're doing for folks. So there's so many ways that this can be applied. Thank you for your time. Again, the ISA CEU form is in the chat. I'll be following up with more information on this. And Carla also dropped in the chat the MFI interest form. So thank you to our members. Really appreciate you having you here. If you're not a member, please join when the time is right. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.